Joining us now for the interview is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's also chief medical advisor to President Biden, which is a job that was created for him at the outset of this presidency. Dr. Fauci, it's an honor to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. Good to be with you.
Why now? Why, after all of these years, all of these presidents, all of these epidemics that you have surged through, why is now the time to go?
Well, you know, Rachel, it's never really a good time to leave, but you have to leave sometime. I have been wanting to pursue another chapter in my career, as you mentioned a bit ago, because I've been wanting to do things outside of the government, particularly to do things, be they lecture or write or get involved in situations where I can serve as hope and inspiration to encourage young people to go into public service, particularly in the arena of science, medicine, and public health. I was thinking of doing that right after the Trump administration ended. But when President Biden was elected, he very quickly asked me, and I accepted with a great deal of honor to do that, to be his chief medical advisor. I thought that was going to last 1 year because, like so many other people, I thought that the COVID outbreak would be over at the end of the first year of the Biden administration, but obviously it's not. So having said that, since things look like they're starting to stabilize a bit, and I believe in the next few months we will do better than we're doing now, I felt, again, I might as well do it now because I want to make sure that when I do leave, I still have the energy and the passion and the health to do the kind of things that I want to do. So all things considered, Rachel, I thought it was the right time.
There are very few people who serve in government who, when you hear they're going to write a book, you think, oh, good, I'll probably learn something from that. No offense to all the public officials who I've had on here to talk about their various books over the years. But I feel like you're an exception to my cynicism on that, in part just because it's rare for one person to head up an important part of the government's capabilities over such a long period of time, over so many different challenges, through so many different presidencies. And so I want to read whatever you have to write about it. I want to hear whatever you have to say about that. But I just wonder if you can kind of just tell us in broad strokes if you feel like in your part of the government, in public health and dealing with infectious diseases, we've gotten better over time. We've been learning the lessons learned and evolving and getting better at this. Or is this one of those situations in which our capacity has actually been eroding? And in some ways, we used to better resource these fights. We used to be better at handling the basics of how to deal with these challenges.
I think it's a mixed bag, Rachel. I think in some respects, we have learned lessons from outbreaks in the past, like HIV and Ebola and Zika and pandemic influenza and the challenges of the possibility of bird flus turning into a pandemic. But in some respects, the situation has eroded. And I think it has in the sense of neglecting of the capabilities of the local public health officials. Because if you want to respond to an emerging infection, you do need leadership from above. You need central support from the government, but at the local level, you also have to have the kind of resources that will allow you to respond. You know, when we learned, and I hope we are still learning, a very important lesson from COVID is that you never, ever underestimate an emerging infection in which you don't know where it's going, because we've been fooled before. So one of the lessons that I hope we learn is that we've got to be prepared. We've got to be able to respond, but we've also got to be flexible. You know, some of our military colleagues have told us it's kind of like when you're at a war, you can plan what you're going to do, but when the bullets go off and the cannons started firing, then it becomes the fog of war, and you've got to be flexible enough to respond. I hope that that lesson has been learned, and as we look forward to the inevitability of future outbreaks, we will not forget that lesson.
Are we facing an increased pace of threat from emerging emerging infectious diseases. I mean, obviously, the world-changing nature of the COVID pandemic is enough on its own. But, now also monkeypox and the reemergence of polio. And, in recent years, it's Ebola and SARS and Zika and all these others. Is there an increased pace of threat from new and resurgent viruses? Or are we just sort of more aware of it with these recent ones?
No, it's not just more aware of it, Rachel. It is, and there are probably a number of complex reasons why that's the case. If you look at the outbreaks that you just enumerated a moment ago, it really follows a pattern that we've known for some time, that about 70 to 75% of all the new emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. Namely, they jump from an animal species to a human. We saw that with HIV. We saw that with Ebola. We see that with monkeypox. And we're seeing with this historic pandemic of COVID-19, which almost certainly evolved the way SARS-CoV-1 did from an animal reservoir such as a bat in the environment that jumps species. So if we really want to pay attention to how we can mitigate this, we have to pay much more attention to the animal-human interface and to what we are doing intentionally or inadvertently of perturbing that animal-human interface by encroaching upon rainforests, by getting involved in interfacing with animals, such as in the wet markets which occur in China when you bring in animals where you don't have any idea what disease they're harboring and you put them in close touch with humans. I think that's one of the things we really better pay more attention to looking forward, is attention to that animal-human interface.
There have been a lot of theories and conspiracy theories and accusations and more or less wild claims about the origins of COVID in particular. It seems like that's when people on the political right really started getting their claws into you and targeting you personally during this pandemic. I mean, as I said, sort of a visible and singular leader on infectious disease issues over all these years, you've faced criticism, sharp criticism before. It does feel a little different. There is a weird, obsessive, violent, sort of ongoing demonization of you by the right that is hinged on COVID. I just have to ask, if from your perspective, if that kind of attention, that criticism feels qualitatively different to you than previous criticism, if it is coming from a different place, if it is indeed more dangerous than the kind of criticism you've had in the past.
Right. Rachel, it's phenomenally 100% different. It's apples and elephants difference. It really is. Back in the day of HIV, and you showed some of those clips, which were quite accurate. What we were doing in the federal government, well, we were being too rigid and restrictive in a disease that needed a great deal of flexibility and input from the community, the AIDS activists that you saw on the clips that you showed. When you examined what they were saying and what they were asking for, they were entirely correct. So they opened our eyes, my eyes particularly, which made me actually turn into one of them and an AIDS activist, because we learned from them, and we learned that we were being too rigid from a clinical trial standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint. And the FDA modernized their approach based on that too. What we're dealing with now is just a distortion of reality, Rachel. I mean, conspiracy theories which don't make any sense at all, pushing back on sound public health measures, making it look like trying to save lives is encroaching on people's freedom. That's a big difference from the AIDS activists who really had a good foundation for their objections.
Do you have any insight into what we ought to do as a country to deal with that? I mean, I feel like it's part of what's going on in the right, where, you want to sort of separate the politics from reality, that you want the measure of truth to be what the ruler says is true. And so anybody citing science or facts or objective reality or nuance is by definition the enemy. I mean, I feel like it is tied to politics in some ways, but even, making observations like that doesn't necessarily give you a way to fix it, doesn't give you a way to fight it. Having been the target of this kind of really specific, really different attack, do you have insight into what we ought to do to protect public officials like yourself and to try to be more rational about this stuff as a country?
Rachel, I wish I did have a positive, constructive answer for you, but I don't. I think you and I are talking about public health issues right now. But what has spilled over and really in many respects impeded a proper response to a public health challenge is something that we see that goes well beyond public health. It's a complete distortion of reality. I mean, a world of where untruths have almost become normalized, how we can see something in front of our very eyes and deny it's happening. I mean, that's the environment we're living in. You could look at January 6th on TV and you have some people who actually don't believe it happened. How could that possibly be? And it's now spilling over in denial about public health principles. So I wish I had an answer, but I don't. I mean, I do have, as I've always been, someone who is cautiously optimistic and always feeling that we will be able to extract the good out of people. And there are the possibility that we'll see, as I say, the better angels in our society prevail. But what's going on out there now with the distortion of reality is very troublesome. And I don't have an answer for it right now, but it certainly is interfering with the proper approach to a public health challenge.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases for the past 38 years, currently now the chief medical advisor to President Biden for a few more months. Sir, thank you for a lifetime so far of service. I can't wait to see what you do next. And thank you for being here to talk with us about it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.